Chapter 99. After pulling Nerissa, who was clinging to his back, even closer, Eugene flipped up the hood of his cloak. He also called on the spirits of the wind to guard his surroundings. On top of that, he erected his mana shield and even mixed in a few defensive spells. In response to his preparations, Christina also cast her own holy spell. These kinds of spells were actually superior in terms of defense to other magic of the same class. After checking the range of the barrier that Christina had cast over them, Eugene told her, "Make sure to stick right behind me." "Yes," Christina replied without any objections. Wasn't he being too reckless? But such thoughts didn't even cross her mind. When it came to things like this, Christina wouldn't argue with Eugene. As he walked forward, Eugenie placed both hands inside of his cloak, but he didn't take out any weapons in advance. Just when he had moved forward a little further with his guard still raised, his highly sharpened senses caught something. But the moment that it was caught, it escaped. No, it hadn't escaped. Instead, it was racing even closer. Eugene was on alert anyway, so his response came immediately. He pulled a sword out from his cloak and sliced through the air. Clang! The sword broke the moment it collided with something. Ignoring the shattered metal fragments that had been sent flying, Eugene pulled out his right hand, which was still in his cloak. The mana that had burst out at the moment of the collision was then absorbed by the devouring sword Asphal. "Kaya!" Nerissa cried at the sudden explosion. Eugene stopped carrying Nerissa and threw her to the wind spirits, who moved her away from the fight. Christina also immediately lifted her wand and covered Nerissa in a shield of light. Now that his body was free of its burden, Eugene charged forwards without any delay. The figure of the guardian, who was wearing an old robe, was captured in his sight. Asphal's outstretched blade jumped and jerked as it diverted the oncoming attacks. Clackling! There was the sound of metal clashing against metal, but Asphal didn't shatter like the first sword had. But the guardian also refused to back down. Instead of continuing to attack, the guardian readied his sword as he waited for Eugene's attack. Asphal dug a furrow in the ground as Eugene ran forward. Then the sword struck upward with an explosive burst of mana. The guardian's sword moved to meet the attack. Whoosh! Before the explosion could engulf the guardian, the sword he was swinging sliced through the now empty space as the attack was withdrawn. "That sword." The guardian's voice rang inside of his head. Without swinging his sword any further, Eugene took a step back. "That's the devouring sword, Asphal." Eugene didn't respond. The guardian looked at Eugene calmly before continuing to speak. "Since when did the Lionheart clan start protecting the wandering elves? Why don't you show your face first and then speak to me aloud?" Eugene said challengingly. His heart was pounding in anticipation. Eugene smoothed his expression and placed Asphal back inside his cloak. As he did so, his lips moved slightly. "Ho!" Seeing the movements of his lips, the guardian let out a small exhale. After staring at Eugene for a few moments, he chuckled with a smile on his face. "I thought that you resembled him, but it looks like it wasn't a case of resemblance at all." Eugene just shrugged without saying anything in reply. In response to this silence, the guardian lowered his sword, then flipped back the hood that was covering his face. "Hamildines." Eugene had swung his sword while hoping that the other party would recognize him from it. Because of sheer embarrassment, the name of the attack absolutely refused to come to his lips, but the sword blow that struck upwards from below was the fifth move of the Hamel style, Dragon Burst. "Are you wandering around as a ghost unable to find eternal rest? I feel like the same could be said of you," Eugene replied with a smirk. Without letting out his voice, Eugene had only moved his lips slightly to mouth out a certain name. An older elf who could recognize Asphal and possessed such skills. A ruthless elf who hated Iris and the Dark Elves and was willing to act on the hatred that he held. There weren't many such elves in Eugene's memory. His hood lowered, the guardian that was revealed had dull green hair, a face that was so beautiful it was unclear whether or not the owner was a man or a woman, and a scar across one cheek. This elf's name was Signard. "What's your purpose here?" Signard asked, no longer speaking with his mental voice. As he slid his sword back into his scabbard, he openly eyed Eugene and Nerissa. Then his gaze moved to Christina. He then stared at Christina for a few moments. Just like how Eugene had recognized Signard, Signard had recognized that Eugene was Hamel. In other words, Signard was also familiar with a niece from 300 years ago. No, isn't it ridiculous to even ask you that? Sigurd muttered to himself as he turned around. He didn't tell them to follow him, but Eugene trailed behind Sigurd without even asking any questions. The latest understudies are on underfiv.website. Is he someone you know? Christina walked over to his side and asked. Having had yet to fully comprehend the situation, Nerissa was still too terrified to speak. If it was someone I knew, would he have attacked me in the first place? Eugene pointed out. However, he stopped attacking, didn't he? Christina pointed out. After seeing our appearances, it looks like he realized that it was a misunderstanding, Eugene said teasingly as he glanced at Christina's face. It also helps that your looks resemble a certain someone. Christina smiled faintly and nodded her head. That was her only response to his words. Without asking any further questions, Christina threw an arm over Nerissa's trembling shoulders with a comforting expression on her face. As they walked forward, the scenery around them appeared to twist. They had just gone through a barrier spell so advanced that it was difficult to even detect it from the outside, let alone interfere with it. Of course, this was nothing to be surprised about. This was a village where wandering elves gathered together. Was there a more mouth-watering hunting ground for the slavers and the tribespeople than a place like this? Under such circumstances, the fact that its location was not well known wasn't just thanks to the existence of the Guardian, but also thanks to the spell that protected the village by keeping it in a separate space. It's a good thing that we brought Nerissa, Eugene thought to himself. If they hadn't had her leading them, they would have been forced to wander through this large forest for quite some time. To think there would be a barrier like this, Christina murmured as she looked around in admiration. Even when they were right in front of the barrier and now after they had gone through it, they still felt no sense of incongruity. Eugene also felt the same way. In terms of wizardry, Eugene's level had surpassed the 5th circle. As a general rule, wizards of the 5th circle or higher were classified as intermediate wizards. However, with Eugene's sensitive mana sense and the knowledge he had obtained from witchcraft, he wasn't just at the level of an intermediate wizard. This isn't some ordinary barrier, Eugene realized. Eugene tried to understand the barrier from a magical standpoint, but it wasn't easy for him to do so. Even when he was walking through the barrier itself, he hadn't felt any sense of discomfort from it. The Sigurd that Eugene could remember wasn't such an exceptional elf in terms of wizardry. How many elves are in this village? Eugene asked. About 100, Sigurd answered. At this response, Nerissa let out a surprised exclamation. They could see a few elves staring at them from the houses in the distance. Their gazes held a mixture of hostility and fear. It seems that we need to have a conversation. What would you like to do? Sigurd checked with Eugene. Christina, do what you want to kill some time, Eugene said without looking back at Christina. His words came suddenly, but Christina wasn't flustered by them. She nodded slightly, then she turned to look back at the elves with eyes full of interest. Don't do anything rude, Eugene warned her. Please don't worry about that, Christina replied with a bright smile. Eugene left Christina and Nerissa behind and followed after Sigurd. Aren't you being a bit too careless? Sigurd asked. Eugene scoffed. What, are you planning on taking the two of them hostage while I'm not with them? Would I have any reason to do that? Of course not. So I don't need to keep my guard up. The elves who live here hate outsiders, Sigurd warned him. I could tell that even without you saying it. Their hostility is extremely pointed. However, it seems that there are only a few elves actually capable of acting on their hostility, Eugene said as he looked over to the elves. Although he hadn't expected there to be 100 of them, he felt like the only elf that could actually threaten Christina was Sigurd. With a grin, Sigurd gave a shrug and changed the subject. About that woman. Eugene knew what he was trying to say. There's a resemblance, right? It goes a bit beyond just having a resemblance. I was surprised when I first saw her as well. However, it's still just a resemblance. She might be deceiving you. Sigurd, just like how you recognized me, Anise would also have recognized me. I might not have said anything openly, but I didn't hide it either. If she was going to recognize me, she would have recognized me far faster than you did. While he was traveling with Christina, Eugene had drawn his sword a few times. No, even before that, when he had fought with a sword against Genos in the Black Lion Castle, Eugene had shown no compunctions about using the Hamel style. This was not only to gain Genos's approval, but also to check Christina's reaction. Her eyes at that time had looked a bit strange. It had bothered him quite a bit, but Christina still hadn't brought up Hamel. If Christina really was a niece, there was no reason for her to hide herself like this. Well, that may be, Sigurd muttered in a low voice as he smiled. He opened a door to an old hut and motioned for Eugene to come on in. I never expected to see you again. That goes for me as well, Eugene agreed with a returned smile as he passed through the door. The moment that he had entered, Sigurd's figure disappeared. Eugene smirked and bent backwards at the waist. A swinging elbow brushed past the fabric of his shirt. Even though he was in an unstable position, Eugene was able to reach out and grab Sigurd by the collar. Then he closed the distance between them by pulling Sigurd close. You really have grown up. You've even learned how to pick a fight, Eugene praised. You're the one who's gotten far too young, Sigurd said as he bared his teeth in a smile. The latest episodes are on underfood.website. After they wrestled like this for a few moments, Sigurd was the one who first lowered his hands. Then he took a few steps back and scanned Eugene from top to bottom. Your skills may not have rusted, but you're weaker than you were in your past life, Sigurd commented. It can't be helped, Eugene shrugged. This body of mine still hasn't fully grown. A human's body. Sigurd paused. How old are you? I'll be 20 soon, Eugene revealed. Haha. Sigurd burst into cheerful laughter at Eugene's reply. Indeed. Even taking into consideration that you're a human being, that's still a young age. Even so, for you to be as accomplished as you are now, it seems that you haven't just been leisurely enjoying your reincarnation. If the world wasn't in the state that it is, I might have been able to enjoy myself leisurely while doing all the things I couldn't do in my previous life, Eugene admitted as he pulled out a chair and plopped down. Sigurd belatedly noticed, that body, could it be the body of a descendant of Vermouth? Don't ask me too many questions, Eugene said with a scowl. Even I don't know enough about my reincarnation to satisfactorily answer all the questions surrounding it. Is that so? I died in the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration. For me, I went straight from my death to being reincarnated. I didn't go to heaven or hell. I died, and when I opened my eyes once more, I was a baby. Sigurd sat across from Eugene as he listened to his story. I don't know the full details, Eugene confessed. I was born as one of Vermouth's descendants, and somehow became the foster child of the main family. After growing up like this, well, I eventually found my way here. You can guess my reason for doing so. Sienna, Sigurd murmured. Eugene changed the subject. So what have you been doing with yourself? 300 years, that isn't a short length of time, even for an elf. It wasn't a very fun time either, Sigurd said as his lips twisted into a wry smile. 300 years ago, Sigurd was one of the elven rangers who fought against the demon kings. He fought in Helmuth, which at that time was considered the front lines of the war. Elven rangers, including Sigurd, roamed through the forests and mountains of Helmuth, combating the armies of demon folk. Hamel had met Sigurd just once in his previous life. While they were both fighting against the demon folk forces in Helmuth, Hamel had once conducted a joint operation with the Elven Rangers. At that time, Sigurd was a young elf overflowing with energy who had known Sienna ever since she was a child. Sienna actually used to call Sigurd her big brother. Although Sigurd was an elf, he didn't really act like one. Especially since he could not accept that Sienna was forced to go to such a dangerous battlefield for the sake of the elves. He had yelled at Sienna several times, trying to get her to return to the forest, and when Sienna refused to listen to him, he even tried to force her to return. Just when he was about to forcefully overwhelm her objections, Hamel had stepped forward. Sigurd was indeed strong, but he wasn't as strong as Hamel. No matter what happens, take care of Sienna. After he had been beaten up and left crumpled on the floor, Sigurd, who was covered in blood and dirt, had still spat out some pretty arrogant words even as he gasped for breath. Take care of her? That chick should probably be stronger than me, though. That was how they had separated from Sigurd. Hamel, Sienna, and Vermouth, the hero's party, continued onward. The allied forces, including Sigurd and the Elven Rangers, remained behind to prevent the demon folk armies from crossing the front line. A few months after that, the Dark Elf Corps led by Iris annihilated a large proportion of the Elven Rangers. After you died, the war ended with Vermouth's oath. Sigurd continued speaking, the other elves and I, we returned back to our territory. We had no choice but to do so. The peace that we had just barely wrought couldn't be broken for the sake of our revenge. The oath that was sworn 300 years ago was at the mercy of the Demon Kings. Neither the Demon King of Incarceration nor the Demon King of Destruction were in a position where they needed to make such a promise. Tempest hadn't said it. But the final battle that had taken place in the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration was far from an equal battle. That the battle hadn't been decided immediately was because Vermouth was there. But if the Demon King of Destruction had joined in as well, even Vermouth wouldn't have been able to survive and escape from such a situation. Nevertheless, the Demon King of Incarceration had still sworn such an oath. Vermouth, Anise, Sienna and Molin had all escaped death. The only one who had died there was Hamel. No one else had perished. With that, the war ended. Vermouth returned to the Kiel Empire and became a duke. Molin founded the Ruhr Kingdom in the north. Anise became a saint in Uraz, and as for Sienna, that girl, she returned to the Elven territory and attended the memorial service, Sigurd recalled. The memorial service? Eugene repeated. The souls of the elves who die outside all eventually return to the world tree, Sigurd began to explain. This was the core tenet of the Elven faith. At the center of the Elven domain stood a 1,000-year-old fairy tree. The elves called this gigantic fairy tree the world tree. And they believed that the souls of all deceased elves, including their elven ancestors, resided in that tree. With the war over, the Elven territory held a memorial service for the victims. Although Sienna wasn't born as an elf, she was part of the Elven family. Also, she managed to inflict more revenge on the enemy for us than anyone else. When the news broke out that Iris and her Dark Elf Corps had annihilated the Elven Rangers, Sienna had torn at her hair as she cried out in despair. "Aya!" Sienna had screamed until her throat had swollen shut and she wept tears of blood. Her rage and hatred had caused her mana to run wild, shaking both the heavens and the earth. Molin had approached Sienna in order to try and calm her down, only to get struck by her magic and get sent flying dozens of kilometers away. Anise had to maintain a barrier with sweat pouring down her face to keep the rampaging magic from swallowing the rest of the party. Hamel had risked his life in order to calm the out-of-control Sienna. If Vermouth hadn't managed to suppress Sienna's magical power, it wouldn't have stopped at just risking his life. Hamel would truly have died, torn to pieces. That was why Eugene hated the Dark Elves. The current generations of Dark Elves might be seen as pitiful, but every time he saw their dark skin, red eyes and long ears, he recalled the sight of Sienna weeping bitterly, holding her in his arms as his clothes were soaked in her tears, running nose and blood. They always reminded him of Sienna crying with such an ugly look on her face. "I'll kill them." Really? "Well, I'll wipe them all out. The Dark Elves and Urus and the Demon King of Fury too. Don't try to kill them alone, let's kill them together." Visit for a better user experience. In the end they had failed. They had managed to kill the Demon King of Fury, but they couldn't kill Iris. No one there could really have imagined that the Demon King of Fury would sacrifice his own life to help Iris and Oberon escape, and that went for Sienna as well. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize. I shouldn't have let her go." I said, "Don't apologize, you son of a bitch. It's not like you let her go because you wanted to let her go." Hamel had gone to her with his head bowed and apologized, but Sienna had yelled at him and kicked him in the shin. They hadn't managed to kill Iris, but they had still successfully killed the Demon King of Fury. Sienna just had to be satisfied with that. After a pause, Eugene asked, "What happened after that?" "Sienna left for Aroth and I stayed in the Elven domain," said Sigurd. "But aren't you here now?" Eugene pointed out in confusion. "That's because 300 years is a long time," Sigurd said with a wry twist of his lips. I still wanted to get my revenge somehow. So I left the forest and wandered the world. I was hoping to kill that damned dark elf." "It looks like you didn't ask Sienna for help," Eugene noted. "That's because that kid is an incomparably larger figure than I am," Sigurd explained. "I might just be one elf on a crusade, but if Sienna were to make a move, the peace obtained through the oath may have been shattered." He hadn't managed to kill Iris. The Dark Elf was still alive and leading the Fury Independence Army. She was claiming to be the legitimate heir of the Demon King of Fury while campaigning to become the next Demon King. Sigurd had failed in getting his revenge. "I've heard that Sienna returned to the Elven territory and went into seclusion," Eugene mentioned. Sigurd denied it. "That's just a rumor. Could it be that you don't trust me?" Eugene raised a brow. Hamel. Signard snorted. Since when were we close enough for there to be unconditional trust between us? Well, that was a good point. Eugene smirked and nodded. Signard continued. I might have accepted that you're Hamel, but I still can't fully trust you. You died in the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration 300 years ago. Even if you were miraculously reincarnated, that still doesn't give me enough to believe that you're free from any bad intentions. I understand where you're coming from. I also had a lot of distressing thoughts at first. Was I really Hamel? Why was I reincarnated? Since I've been reincarnated, just what in the world am I meant to do? If my reincarnation was all part of someone's plan, doesn't that mean that whatever I do now that I have been reincarnated is all part of me dancing as someone's marionette? Eugene chuckled as he reached a hand into his cloak. However, Signard, it's pointless for me to worry about such things. I am Hamel. As long as I am certain of that, that is enough for me. What did I want in my previous life as Hamel? I wanted to kill all of the demon kings. And the current me? I still want the same thing. I'm going to kill all the demon kings. The demon king of incarceration and the demon king of destruction will die at my hands. I'll also exterminate all the demon folk who are kicking up a fuss in Helmuth. Signard was struck silent. The problem is this. It's clear what I want, but getting it done is too difficult. Or at least it's too difficult for me right now, Eugene muttered. It's not just difficult, it's impossible, Signard retorted. No, it isn't impossible, Eugene denied as he rose from the chair. He glared at Signard without pulling his hand out of his cloak. It's so difficult that it might be infinitely close to impossible, but it's not impossible. I can do it. I will definitely do it. Signard was silent. Eugene pressed him. Signard. I need to meet with Sienna. She's dead, Signard responded in a quiet voice, only for Eugene to burst into laughter. Don't spout such bullshit, Eugene cursed as he pulled out the leaf of the world tree that had been stored within his cape. Upon seeing it, Signard's eyes shook wildly. He gasped. Is that? If someone told me that Sienna died, I wouldn't believe it until I personally set my eyes on her corpse. So if you want to convince me that she is dead, bring me her body. Or at least lead me to where her body is being kept, Eugene demanded. Eugene's other hand had yet to emerge from inside of his cloak. Signard couldn't feel any killing intent coming from Eugene, but he knew that Eugene would still be able to swing a sword at him even without the intent to kill. Unlike in my previous life, I've learned quite a bit of magic, Eugene revealed. The barrier around this village was something that no ordinary wizard could even begin to imitate. If you want to convince me that she's dead, then you'll first need to explain to me about this village's barrier. This barrier, the one who made it was Sienna, wasn't it? Eugene asked. Signard let out a long sigh before getting up. Hamel. What would you do if I refused to trust you right until the very end and refused to tell you anything? Signard proposed. Then I'll do what I did to you 300 years ago, Eugene answered him. I'll beat the shit out of you until you're on the verge of death, and make it so that you have no choice but to speak even if you don't want to. The way you are now, that's impossible. It's not impossible. Whoosh. The flames of the white flame formula engulfed Eugene's body. When compared to the things that I want to accomplish, it's not even on the same order of magnitude, Eugene boasted. Could he win if he fought with Signard? If he used everything that he had, the Moonlight Sword, the Devouring Sword, the Dragon Spear, the Thunderbolt, the Storm Sword, and the Holy Sword, then yes. Since he had enough weapons, if he uses Ignition from the very start, then he would definitely win. The latest understudies are on underfiv.website. Is that so? Signard accepted his claim with a chuckle and looked down at the leaf of the world tree. Eventually he said to Eugene, Follow me. Chapter 100, The Guardian 2. The place where Signard led him to was an empty lot right behind his house. As he looked around at the spacious vacant lot, Eugene shrugged in bemusement. If we're going to do something like this, shouldn't we at least head out a bit further from your house? Eugene suggested. What is that supposed to mean? Signard asked. If you get beaten up here, won't that leave you feeling a bit embarrassed from now on whenever you see the other elves who've witnessed your defeat? I'm sorry, but I'm also not in a position where I can be considerate about your reputation. If we do end up fighting, I'm going straight to full force without any probing or holding back. Having given his warning, Eugene began operating the white flame formula. However, the reaction he received was different from what he had expected. Signard stood there woodenly, blinked his eyes, and then let out a sigh of exasperation. Even though you've died and been reborn, it seems that your true nature hasn't changed, Sigurd lamented. What does that mean, you bastard? Eugene demanded. In any case, Hamel, I didn't bring you here to fight with you, Sigurd explained. Is that so? Well, in my defense, you asked me to follow you all of a sudden, so I thought that we were going to rumble, Eugene mumbled. There's no reason for us to fight, Sigurd said as he turned to face Eugene. Hamel, if you had just thoughtlessly found your way here to ask me about Sienna, I wouldn't have anything to say to you. However, despite your rudeness, you've come here with a clear cause. He was talking about the leaf of the world tree. Since you've come here with that in your hands, then I can't just stay silent about Sienna. However, Hamel, I don't know as much about everything that happened as you may have been hoping for, Sigurd warned him. If that's the case, then just tell me what you do know, Eugene stated. First of all, why don't you take a look at what's right in front of you, Sigurd said with a grin as he turned back around. In front of me? Not understanding what Sigurd meant by these words, Eugene tilted his head in confusion. Then he slowly peeled open his eyes and scanned his surroundings. They were in a large, open space. Sigurd was standing there unmoving. There were also a few trees, but that was it. Ho! Eugene suddenly noticed something. As an elven village in the middle of the forest, it was only natural for there to be many trees. However, one species of tree in particular seemed unique. Unconsciously, Eugene began walking over to these trees. It had been over a month since he had entered Samar. When it came to trees, he had seen enough of them day after day that he had become sick of them. It wasn't like he had just been seeing the same type of trees either. There were more than 100 different species of trees growing in this vast forest. Eugene wasn't a botanist, nor did he have enough interest in trees to memorize the subtle differences between each tree's characteristics. But now, looking at the trees that stood next to Sigurd, the interest that had previously been lacking was starting to sprout. They're fairy trees, Eugene realized. In all of the vast Samar rainforest, this species of tree grew solely in the elven domain. The fairy tree was the most valuable tree in the world and was considered to be the best material for making magic staffs. They're not just simple fairy trees, Sigurd claimed with a sorrowful smile as he looked at the tree. These trees are seedlings of the world tree. So that was it, Eugene muttered. He had now understood something. Eugene slowly looked up at the sky. For an ordinary village where only about 100 elves were living, the barrier that protected this village from the outside world was something that far surpassed what a decent wizard could even begin to imitate. Could it be, they're casting a spell? Eugene asked in disbelief. Hamel, you might be able to understand the spells of the current era, but you won't be able to comprehend this spell, Sigurd stated confidently. Ancient magic, Eugene realized. Even among the elves, it's rare for anyone to successfully cast this spell. Even Sienna wasn't able to completely understand the ancient magic behind it, Sigurd said as he stroked his hand down the trunk of a tree. As for someone like me who's not too enlightened on the mechanics of magic, I can only think of this ancient magic as the divine favor and miracle of the forest. After all, isn't that truly the case? These few trees are able to protect this village, just like how the elven territory is protected beneath the leaves of the world tree. Was this some kind of formation? Eugene examined the trees with narrowed eyes. These 3 fairy trees were just saplings of the world tree, and they didn't appear to have any magic formulas engraved onto them. Nevertheless, they were able to independently maintain the barrier. As expected of ancient magic, it had a truly different foundation from modern magic. Did Sienna arrange this? Eugene eventually asked. I've already told you. Even Sienna wasn't able to fully comprehend this ancient magic, Sigurd reminded him. If that's the case, then is it, as you said just now, a divine grace or miracle of the forest? Eugene asked. Sigurd nodded. Hamel, I don't know what happened to the elven domain. Eugene listened silently. I'm not the only one either. Haven't you ever thought that it's strange? There are about 100 elves living in this village. There must surely be even more elves still living outside the forest, Sigurd pointed out. 200 years ago, the wise Sienna had suddenly disappeared from Arath and had gone into seclusion. The most plausible theory thrown around about her seclusion was that she had returned to the elven territory that was hidden somewhere within the Samar rainforest. But that was 200 years ago. As a person who was greatly revered by all in Arath, Her sudden disappearance had Aroth assigned tracking down Sienna's movements as a matter of national importance. Aroth didn't simply choose to respect Sienna's seclusion. This couldn't be helped. If Sienna had just properly left a letter behind explaining the situation before going into seclusion, Aroth would have respected Sienna's withdrawal from the world. However, Sienna's seclusion had been too abrupt, and Aroth at that time had been plunged into chaos by the sudden proposal to establish the Black Tower of Magic, with Sienna having taken the lead in opposing this Black Tower of Magic. Perhaps it was the Black Wizards, or perhaps it was Helmuth's demon folk and its demon kings who had somehow managed to assassinate Sienna. Although such words were just treated as spurious claims these days, that hadn't been the case 200 years ago. As such, Aroth had devoted all its resources into tracking Sienna's whereabouts. They had even sent a delegation to the Samar rainforest to make contact with the elves. However, the delegation hadn't been able to find anything. Let alone finding Sienna. Aroth hadn't even been able to make it to the elven domain. This was just absurd. No matter how tightly the elves kept their mouths shut, the Aroth of 200 years ago would still have done everything that it possibly could in order to find Sienna. For them to not be able to find her even after all that, there had to be a deeper reason why they were left with no results other than failure. Sigurd began to explain. Not all of the elves in the world were born in the elven domain. However, many elves, including myself, were born within the elven territory. Eugene held his tongue. Hamel. I can still vividly remember the scenery of that place even now. I remember how magnificent the world tree was, and how beautiful the elven city that surrounded it and stretched in all directions looked. However, strangely, I can't remember how I got in and out of the domain, Sigurd confessed. Elves who lived outside the forest would still often return to Samar. However, all of these elves were unable to return to their hometown, and were instead forced to wander the forest. So it's because of a spell, Eugene muttered in a low voice. Something interfered with their memories. It wasn't just one or two people. It interfered with the memories of the entire elven race. That kind of magic had to have serious aftereffects. No matter how careful one was with magic that touched on the mind, it was still easy to destroy the brains of those they were trying to manipulate. Were any other memories clouded? Eugene asked. No, none, Sigurd simply replied. A mental manipulation magic with no aftereffects. Was such a thing even possible? Was it really possible to interfere with the memories of an entire race and conveniently delete only a selected portion of their memories? Within the bounds of magic that Eugene knew, such a thing was impossible. However, if it was Sienna. In the end, this just means that you don't know anything useful about Sienna, Eugene said resignedly. That's right, Sigurd replied with a wry smile. I returned to this forest decades ago. I had been wandering around Helmuth trying to get my revenge, but I failed. All that I managed to do there was catch the disease that has been eating away at me. He was talking about the demonic disease. Eugene flinched at this news and stared at Sigurd. On the surface, Sigurd didn't look like someone who had caught an illness. Sensing Eugene's gaze, Sigurd smiled wryly and pulled up his clothes to offer a better look. From the center of his chest, black spots could be seen spreading out like a drop of ink on a white page. Are you okay? Eugene asked in concern. I'll be fine as long as I don't leave this forest, Sigurd assured him. If they lived outside the forest, an elf who had caught the demonic disease had a life expectancy of 5 years at the most. This too should be a miracle bestowed by the divine grace of the forest, Sigurd sincerely declared. Is it because of the world tree? Eugene probed. That's right, Sigurd confirmed. Things were different from 300 years ago when all 5 demon kings still lived. Even if the elves were afflicted with the demonic disease, as long as they returned to Samar, they would be able to keep their lives. No other forest would do. Only the Samar rainforest, where both the fairy trees and the world tree grew, could preserve the lives of these elves. Don't even think about using sentimentality to change the subject, Eugene said as he glared at Sigurd. You called those fairy trees saplings of the world tree, didn't you? To think that you would dismiss someone's sad past as mere sentimentality. Whether it's in the past or the present, you've always had a vulgar personality. Sigurd huffed. What are you saying all of a sudden? I just wanted to make sure of the situation, Eugene argued. I have no intention of hiding it, Sigurd said with a sniff as he stroked the trunk of the fairy tree. All I want is to die in my hometown. Again with the sentimentality. Listen until the end, you son of a bitch. Elves really do benefit from such a well-constructed public image. They're always seen as a race with beautiful appearances, who live in the forest while being peace-loving, and everyone knows that elves only use kind and pretty words to speak, Eugene noted sarcastically. We really are such a race, Signard insisted. Don't bullshit me, you motherfucker. If elves really were a race who only use kind and pretty words, why was Sienna, who was raised by the elves, able to out-curse common mercenaries? Eugene asked challengingly. Because we're beautiful and peace-loving, we happen to have sharpened our tongues so that we don't need to resort to spilling blood in fights, Signard said defensively. Eugene snorted dismissively. Ha, fine, you long-eared bastard. Just keep trying to play up the sentimentality. Signard had wanted to die in his hometown. While harboring such a desire, he had returned to Samar. However, no matter how much he wandered, he wasn't able to return to the hometown that he so fondly remembered. Signard resumed his tale. Even back during those dozens of years ago, the natives of this forest were as savage as ever. If an elf was spotted, their eyes would light up and those sons of bitches would race over like dogs in heat. Even though I was dying from the demonic disease, it wasn't difficult for me to deal with any one of those barbarians. While I was trying to find my way back home, I rescued other wandering elves who were in crisis. Eugene interrupted. Ha, so what's with these fairy trees being saplings of the world tree? Then I had a dream, Signard resumed with a frown at the interruption. At the word dream, Eugene recalled the dream that he had been visited by not so long ago. The dream that the Holy Sword had shown him. The dream that might just be a revelation from a god. Eugene's eyes shone as he stepped closer to Signard and asked, could it be that you saw Sienna in your dream? Taken aback, Signard paused before answering. No, Sienna didn't make an appearance. Eugene showed a blatantly disappointed expression at this reply. Seeing this expression, Signard clenched his fists tightly in anger before continuing to speak. Instead of her, I saw the world tree. In his dream, Signard saw the roots of the gigantic world tree diverging to grow into a few smaller trees. It wasn't just a simple dream, though. When he woke up from his dream, there were 3 young seedlings planted in front of Signard. Eugene hummed thoughtfully. Indeed, after having dreamt such a dream, it was certainly possible that the barrier protecting this village was truly a miracle bestowed by the divine grace of the forest. While suppressing his surprise, Eugene looked at the saplings of the world tree. In fact, they had already grown so large that they couldn't really be called saplings, but these fairy trees were definitely still too small to be called world trees. Damn it, Eugene spat out a curse as he scratched his head in frustration. So what? In the end, this just means that you don't know anything about Sienna or the elven domain. It's not like I don't know anything, Signard denied as he raised a finger and pointed at the leaf of the world tree that Eugene was currently holding. Hamel, what you have there is the genuine leaf of the world tree. What, did you think that I might be holding onto a fake leaf of the world tree? Eugene scoffed. After a pause, Signard ignored his rudeness and continued. I'm not able to confirm the exact location of my hometown, nor am I able to find my way there, but I do remember those leaves. No matter where you were in the world, if you used the leaves of the world tree, you would be able to warp back to the elven territory. Eugene was well acquainted with this fact. But this leaf has already been used, Eugene pointed out. However, it hasn't disintegrated yet and still remains perfectly intact, Signard countered. If you manage to get close to the world tree, that leaf should be able to lead you to the territory. Really? Eugene asked, his eyes blinking in astonishment. However, Signard's expression showed that he wasn't all that certain about the circumstances that he had just described. That's how it would be under the usual circumstances, but I can't be sure of that now. All of the elves, including myself, have had our memories erased by some form of magic. Not only that, but I wasn't able to find the elven domain no matter where I went in Samar. A seal. As Eugene muttered these words, Signard nodded in agreement. If the elven territory truly has been sealed away, that must mean that there was a reason that left them with no choice but to do so. However, considering the fact that the leaf of the world tree still remains intact and that you have it with you, it might just become the key needed in order to open that locked door. He had no choice but to give it a go. Without saying anything, Eugene stared at the tree leaf in his hands. Even though it looked like it might disintegrate at just the slightest touch, the leaf wouldn't crumble no matter how tightly he held it in his hands. Eugene felt an incomprehensible power coming from within this leaf. It was a power similar to mana but packed with more vitality. Hamel, Sigurd eventually called out. Don't call me by that name anymore, Eugene said as he spun a leaf of the world tree in his hands. That name is from 300 years ago. Right now my name isn't Hamel, it's Eugene. Is that really important? Of course it's important. I don't want my reincarnation to become the talk of the town. Aren't you at least planning on revealing that you're Hamel to that woman who resembles a niece? Nope. The only ones to know that I've been reincarnated are Tempest, Sienna's familiar, the demon king of incarceration, and you. Did Sienna have a familiar? Sigurd asked curiously. You didn't know? If you ever get the chance you should go to Aroth and take a look. In their royal library they're keeping hold of Sienna's familiar named Mare. She really looks just like Sienna in her youth, Eugene teased. But you've never met Sienna when she was young, Sigurd protested. Even if I didn't, just by looking at her, you can tell that you're looking at a young Sienna, Eugene claimed. Sigurd's eyes shook slightly. He was brought back to hundreds of years ago when a young Sienna was still toddling around the village. As he recalled this distant past, Sigurd's shoulders drooped for a moment. I can't go to Aroth, Sigurd realized. Eugene nodded. I'm aware. Since you've caught the demonic disease, you aren't able to leave the forest. If you're aware, then why did you even tell me that? I just wanted to annoy you. Sigurd's eyes widened in shock. After glaring at Eugene for a few moments, his shoulders slumped in disbelief. Changing the subject, so you said that the demon king of incarceration is also aware of your reincarnation? I can't be certain of it, but he's probably aware, Eugene confessed. That's why I need Sienna's help. Well, it's not really all that important of an issue for right now. I don't know what that guy is scheming, but even though he knows it's me, he has no intention of killing me. That cheeky bastard. Eugene ground his teeth as he remembered what happened in Hamel's grave. The more he thought about it, the more irritating and shitty the situation felt. He was almost killed by Amelia and Hamel's corpse had been made into a death knight. But while this was all very annoying, the most annoying thing of all was that the demon king of incarceration hadn't even done anything. Even though he knew that Eugene was the reincarnation of Hamel from 300 years ago, the demon king of incarceration hadn't done anything to Eugene. Instead, he had actually forced Amelia to back down when she tried to kill Eugene. For him to say that it's not an important issue, could something like that really be described as unimportant? As Sigurd inwardly marveled at Eugene's composure, he shook his head in amazement. Finally getting to the point, Sigurd admitted, Eugene, I have a request to make of you. I thought you might. If you want to follow me to the world tree, you can do as you please, Eugene said, not caring too much about Sigurd's request. Wasn't it only obvious that Sigurd would make such a request? He must still desire to somehow return to the hometown where he was born, and the only way to enter the elven estate, which had probably been sealed away, was the genuine leaf of the world tree that was in Eugene's possession. No, my request isn't about that, Sigurd said as he shook his head. I'm not in a position where I can leave the village unguarded. Although the barrier does protect this village, the barrier is not absolute. If you're determined to find it, you can discover this village. So what is it then? Eugene prompted. I want you to take the elves away from this village. He hadn't expected such a request. Unable to reply immediately, Eugene stared blankly at Sigurd's face. I can't give you a definite answer, Eugene eventually replied. There is no guarantee that this leaf will absolutely lead us into the elven domain. If that's the case, then I want you to take the elves living here to a safe location other than Samar and protect them, Sigurd said as if he had been prepared for such a response. I understand your feelings, but isn't it more dangerous for these elves to leave the forest? Eugene asked as his eyes went to the 3 fairy trees. I've also become familiar with the fact that this forest is a hellhole for the elves. Both outsiders and the natives work together to hunt the elves, then they sell them outside the forest as slaves. Even if that's the case, the elves should have no other choice but to live in this forest. You just need to transplant these fairy trees, Sigurd proposed. Are fairy trees really the type of tree that could so easily be dug up by the roots and transplanted? Eugene asked doubtfully. As long as you have the leaf of the world tree, it's possible. How? You just need to transplant the fairy trees in soil where that leaf has been buried. Without replying right away, Eugene stared at Sigurd. He knew what Sigurd meant by these words. Sigurd was asking Eugene, no, the Lionheart clan, to become the guardian of the elven race. In a lawless place like Samar, the treatment of elves was terrible, but there were other countries on this continent that didn't treat the elves with such blatant cruelty. At that very moment, the northern kingdom of Ruhr treated the elves as respected personages, and the Holy Empire took the enslavement and persecution of elves very seriously. In the first place, it wasn't just about the elves. Slavery itself had already been treated as an evil practice that was supposed to have been abolished 300 years ago. However, it was difficult for the elves to trust the Ruhr or the Holy Empire to protect them. It was because these two countries were too close to Helmuth. Since the demonic disease afflicting the elves was caused by proximity to the demon folk and demon kings, the spread of the disease inevitably increased the closer a location was to Helmuth. Kiel was quite far away from Helmuth. On top of that, the Lionheart clan had taken the entire southern Uklas mountain range as their domain, and their main estate at the capital encompassed a huge forest that surrounded their mansion. "I am sincerely making this request," Sigurd said with his head bowed. "Ha, as if you even needed to make it a request." Eugen smirked and smacked Sigurd on the shoulder. "Why are you acting like it's such a hard thing to do? We just need to transplant these trees back to the forest at the main estate and release about 100 elves into the forest there as well. It wouldn't be as easy as Eugene made it sound." However, he still willingly gave his word. It wasn't really for the sake of Sigurd. It was more that he knew it was what Sienna would have wanted, so Eugene could at least do that much. Chapter 101. The Market. 1. "I think you might look a bit more intimidating if we stick a beard on you," Christina said thoughtfully. "Do I even need to look more intimidating?" Eugene questioned. "Since you're trying to disguise yourself as a slave trader, wouldn't it be better if everyone could recognize you as a slave trader as soon as they looked at you?" Christina argued. "Maybe so," Eugene admitted as he looked at Christina with a falsely apologetic expression. "But why are we only working on my disguise? You need to disguise yourself as well." "Why do I have to put on a disguise as well?" Christina objected. "Then do you really intend on trying to get into a slave market while wearing a priest's outfit that tells everyone that you're a priest? Do you really think those bunch of bastards would be willing to let you in?" Eugene pointed out. "That might truly be the case, but I have no intention of changing my outfit or altering my appearance," Christina insisted, her face hardening into a stubborn pout as she stuck her chin out. It seemed that she was unwilling to take off her priest garb for any reason. "Also, there's no need for me to put on a disguise as well, is there? If we come up with a reason for why a priest might be accompanying you, then, setting aside your position as the saint, that course of action is sure to bring a lot of scorn to the Holy Empire. For one of their priests to actually accept money from a slave trader in order to help them purchase an elf. Will you really be all right if such rumors start to circulate?" Eugene asked with a raised brow. At these words, Christina's face stiffened even further. After hesitating for a few moments, she got up from her seat. "I'll give it some thought," Christina said, giving in. "In fact, it's not like anything will happen if you don't follow me," Eugene offered as an alternative. "There's no way that I can do that," Christina firmly denied. "It is my duty to accompany you on your journey." "Why would you go so far as to call it your duty?" Eugene teased her as he turned back to look into the mirror. He was using a transformation spell a level higher than the one he had used on Bolero Street in the past. Although he still wasn't able to make any changes to his skeletal structure, Eugene's current face had completely transformed into that of a grumpy middle-aged man. On top of that, his hair color had been changed from gray to yellow. After covering his hands in oil, Eugene smoothed his hair to the side. A slave market was going to be held today, and all the tribes of Samar were expected to be attending in large numbers. This market, which was only held twice a year, would exhibit several races that particularly captured the interests of its foreign visitors, and the most valuable among all these races were the elves. Before heading out to rediscover the elven domain by using the leaf of the world tree, Eugene had decided to attend the slave market in order to rescue the elves that were to be exhibited there. His reason for doing so wasn't particularly pressing. It was still uncertain whether the leaf of the world tree could truly be used to lead them into the elven territory, but once that matter was taken care of, Eugene had promised to take the elves living in the village back with him to the Lionheart clan's main estate. Although it would be better if he had first sought out the permission of the main family, since he had already decided on this course of action, he intended to just take them back with him for now and then ask for permission later. And since he was going to take them with him anyway, wouldn't it wrap things up nicely if he took care of the elves that were going to be exhibited at the slave market first? I think a beard might be going too far, Eugene muttered as he looked into the mirror and twisted his face this way and that way. Yes, I believe that your face already looks intimidating enough as it is, young master. The one who had just chimed in with her opinion. It was a one-eyed elf. She was staring at Eugene with her single eye, and unlike her polite manner of address, her gaze wasn't all that polite. Although Eugene and Christina were the guests of Guardian Signard, many of the elves living in this village harbored antipathy toward humans. That was also the case for this one-eyed elf named Lavera. The elves living here felt particular animosity toward Eugene, since they had been informed that they would be leaving Samar soon in order to follow him and live in the forest that belonged to the Lionheart clan. They understood why this was happening. Guardian Signard had personally informed them of the facts behind this move. Rather than Samar, which was infested with barbarians and slavers, it would be much more comfortable for the elves to live in the forests of the Lionheart clan's main estate. Since they would even be moving over the fairy trees that had long protected the elves of this village, there would also be no need to worry about the demonic disease. However, several elves, including Lavera, felt unavoidable fear at the thought of being protected not by their own kind or by the forest, but by the hated humans. Eugene also had a rough idea of what kind of position this proposal had left the elves in. He had to admit to himself that by first attending the slave market and rescuing the elves that were being exhibited there, he was hoping to make a public demonstration of his goodwill toward the elves. Although I don't really have the spare time to care about how they might react to it, Eugene mused. Still, it should at least soften the hostility that they had shown him from the very start. They wouldn't have any choice but to do so, right? They were taking an unnecessary risk in going to the slave market, and they were going to have to spend a lot of money to purchase the exhibited elves and escort them back to the village. Then Eugene would also be allowing them to live in the Lionheart clan's estate, which was much safer than this forest. After having done that much, if they still mindlessly dislike us just because we're humans, would they still be able to call themselves elves? They would just be mannerless bastards instead. While having these thoughts, Eugene changed the cut of his cloak. Then Christina, who had headed out a few moments ago, returned to Eugene's side. "Sir Eugene," Christina called. "Take a look at this." On her return, Christina's face was covered with a proud smile. Having covered up her priestly outfit with a large robe, she walked over to stand in front of Eugene and spun in circles. "If I do this, then there's no need for me to take off my priest's garb, and if I put up the hood as well, I can even cover my face," Christina declared. "Don't you think that it's a little funny to brag about that like it's some great discovery?" Eugene asked mockingly. Christina's smile faltered at this question. She stopped spinning around on the spot and while glaring at Eugene with narrowed eyes, she buttoned up her robe. "Is it really all right for me to not follow along?" Nerissa, who was standing nearby on her crutches, asked hesitantly. She certainly was afraid of going to the slave market, but she also felt the desire to assist Eugene and Christina, who had already done so much to help her. "You should just wait here," Eugene said firmly. "If we needlessly take you with us, it would be a pain if we were to run into the Garung tribe." "Yes," Nerissa accepted meekly. Nerissa's shoulders shook slightly at the words, Garung tribe. It had only been a few days since she had thrown herself off of a cliff in order to escape her tribal pursuers mounted on giant wolves. "There's also no real need for you to follow us," Eugene said, addressing Lavera. Lavera shook her head. "Do you really think that a foreigner without any goods for sale will be able to enter and exit the market as he wills?" Her argument was irrefutable. Eugene checked the ivory plaque that he had already received from Signard. This plaque was issued by the Urbier tribe, one of the great tribes of Samar. Without this plaque, no matter what they did to disguise themselves as slave traders, they wouldn't even be able to enter the market. "Perhaps you could rely on the Lionheart name to get in," Lavera proposed. "If you reveal your true identity, master, then the various tribes are sure to receive you as an esteemed guest and allow you to participate in the market. I don't want to get in there bad enough that I'm willing to smear dirt all over the clan's name," Eugene grumbled as he stood up. With a smile in her single eye, Lavera assured him, "As long as you're carrying the plaque and have trade goods to sell, you can enter the market by just paying a small entrance fee." "Will there be an inspection?" Eugene asked. "There shouldn't be. In the first place, those plaques are only spread amongst the slave traders," Lavera explained. Eugene didn't bother to ask why Signard would have such a plaque. Wasn't the reason obvious? The slave traders who originally held it must have been caught sneaking around, trying to capture a few of the wandering elves, only to meet their ends at Signard's sword. Don't worry about it too much. Since I've had personal experience with the slave market, I can provide you with all the guidance that you need, Lavera said as she fastened a set of shackles around her own neck and limbs. Watching this sight, Nerissa began to tremble in fright. Especially when Lavera locked the heavy chains around her own ankles, Nerissa couldn't bear it any longer and was forced to sit down with a pale face. Unlike Nerissa, who had been overcome by her trauma, Lavera's eyes had settled into a cold gaze. She staggered upright and then placed the end of the long chain in Eugene's hand. Do I really need to hold on to this so early? Eugene asked uncomfortably. You need to get used to treating me with as much cruelty as your face suggests you are. If you pointlessly treat me with care, the other slave merchants and the natives will be suspicious of you, Sir Eugene, Lavera insisted. Come then, slave. Eugene immediately acquiesced and awkwardly tugged on the chain. At this sight, Nerissa was forced to cover up a shaky smile, while Lavera just shook her head without saying a word. I'm Ryan. And I am Tina. Before they arrived at the slave market, they stopped to get their stories straight. Eugene's alias was Ryan and Christina's alias was Tina. Ryan was a former mercenary turned slaver, and Tina was Ryan's wife. Do I really need to be your wife? Christina asked petulantly. Then do you want to act as a slave as well? Eugene asked in return. In the first place, for a couple to work as a pair of slavers. There's a saying, isn't there, that birds of a feather flock together? When you say that with your current face, Sir Eugene, no, Sir Ryan, it feels very offensive to me, Christina protested. Sorry to say, but your current face isn't exactly a looker either, Eugene said without sounding particularly apologetic. Christina's face twisted into a scowl at these provocative words. Christina's face had been transformed into that of a middle-aged woman who looked venomous-tongued and ill-tempered. While you're at it, you should also change the way you speak. Huh. Your polite way of speaking doesn't fit that face at all. You should mix in a few curses and make your voice a bit scratchier, Eugene trailed off in thought. Do I really need to do that? Christina asked reluctantly. Would you rather be more of a hindrance than a helper by making a fuss and drawing attention? Eugene challenged. Oh, I'll do my... Christina hesitated and then changed tracks. You got it, boss. It looks like you just can't pull it off. Eugene shook his head. Why don't you try acting like a mute instead? There shouldn't be any need for you to open your mouth while we're in there in any case. Christina squeezed her lips shut and glared at Eugene. If she had her usual face, she would have been able to hide her anger behind a smile instead of glaring at him like this. But perhaps because of how her face had been altered, her angry stare looked especially harsh today. Only the largest of tribes held the right to host this slave market. This time the market would be held in the territory of the Xyle tribe. I thought that we would be going to a city at least. Perhaps because both foreigners and tribespeople would be coming and going, the market would be held in the middle of the forest instead of in a city. In terms of being a black market, it resembled the Bolero Road that he had visited in Arath. But otherwise, the slave market held here was incomparably more primitive than Bolero Road. Even the entrance reflected this fact. The warriors of the Xyle tribe who had set up patrols throughout this area of the forest gave wide-eyed looks to the merchants who were trickling in, while making threatening gestures to the guests from the other tribes. It feels like the market is just a front. Eugene had a rough idea of what was going on here. The slave market only opened twice a year. During those times, even hostile tribes were not allowed to fight each other. This was because the great tribes had prohibited any fighting within the slave market. Even so, in a place where so many people gathered, seeds of conflict couldn't help but be sowed here and there. With how much wariness and hostility each tribe harbored toward the others, the tribes felt the need to inflate their own stature in order to deter each other's influence. The distinguished guests who were connected to each of the tribes also deeply enjoyed such a sight. For them, the market itself was a rarely seen attraction. Also, slaves weren't the only things traded here. Various other items of interest were also being exchanged. Samar was vast. This place wasn't just overgrown with trees. Many other valuable resources rarely seen in the rest of the continent were buried within. Various priceless gems and mithril extracted from Samar's mines and the materials rendered from the forest's monsters were all sold here. Apart from that, There were also potions that could artificially increase one's mana or strengthen one's body. These were the product of the legacies being passed down through each of the tribes from their ancestors. For these foreign nobles, such things were more valuable than slaves, even if these slaves were elves. "I want an elf with some kind of physical imperfection," one such noble muttered to himself. It was Dodgerang Kobold. Rather than things that weren't of obvious value, this pig was more interested in an elven slave that he could see with his own eyes, possess and play with. "There's no need to rush," Ujicha persuaded Dodgerang while resisting the urge to sneer. This chief warrior of the Garang tribe had somehow managed to survive the encounter with the unknown assailant a few days ago. It was all thanks to the unknown man's whims. After looking at the pathetic Ujicha who had pissed his pants on the spot and was begging for his life, the man had simply disappeared. Ujicha felt no shame from what had happened. Anyone who was placed in such a situation would have peed their pants. In fact, none of the warriors of the Garang tribe who were there at that time had come out of it with dry pants. Some had even shit themselves. There weren't just one or two of them who had also collapsed to the ground and started begging for their lives. Compared to these warriors, Ujicha seemed practically dignified and had kept his honor as the chief warrior. He might have begged for his life, but he hadn't fallen to his knees. He might have pissed himself, but at least he hadn't emptied his bowels. He somehow hadn't died and had managed to live another day. Wasn't that enough to ask for? One of Shimuan's 12 finest, Bronjarak, had lost his life, but Ujicha had survived. Dodgerang Kobold, an important guest, had also made it out of the situation alive. That was enough to count the situation as a success. Ujicha had not been able to get Bron to introduce him to the ladies of the Shimuan kingdom, but as long as he managed to satisfy Dodgerang's desires, he could still ensure a splendid future for himself in Shimuan. "Just let me tell you, you'd better make sure to take good care of me." Dodgerang glared at Ujicha with an arrogant upturn of his eyes. "Just because Bron got himself killed, it doesn't mean that you can get away with treating me badly. After all, you know who my father is, don't you? Do you really think I wouldn't notice what you're really feeling on the inside?" Dodgerang sure was an asshole, but it wasn't like he was completely brainless. Before he had come here, he had been forced to listen to dozens of lectures about the importance of the deal being made between his father, Count Kobold, and Ujicha. Even after arriving at the Garang tribe, the deceased Bron had also given him dozens of reminders. "About your tribe's mine. You know that my father is the only one who can give you the terms that you want for the deal, right?" Dodgerang haughtily sniffed. Although not necessarily the truth, Count Kobold was the best trading partner that Ujicha had found after reaching out to several places. In the first place, Count Kobold was an aristocrat of major importance even within the entirety of Shimuan. Bron's death. Well, it was unavoidable. "It wasn't my fault," Dodgerang stammered. Dodgerang had no desire to recall that moment. No, he did not. What made it even more frightening in retrospect was the fact that Bron had died. Even though he had been the least of Shimuan's 12 finest, Bron had nevertheless been one of the 12 strongest knights in Shimuan, and Count Kobold had valued him very much. That was why he had attached Bron as an escort for his foolish son and had sent him to Samar. "I understand what you're saying, young master." Ujicha widened his eyes innocently as he looked at Dodgerang. "Bron's death was an accident. Should the deal be finalized, I will make sure to testify to Count Kobold as the young master wishes me to." "Right, that's right. Bron died after falling in a cesspit. After getting drunk. He fell in your tribe's toilets because of their open design. He stumbled into the hole feet first and died," Dodgerang declared proudly. Ujicha hesitated. "Rather than that, how about we say that he died while trying to ride a horse after he had too much to drink? In any case, there's no need for the young master to worry. Since I'll do all that I can so that you don't need to worry about anything." Okay then," Dodgerang accepted. "I'll make sure to compliment you to my father so that my father can grant you a knighthood." At the word knighthood, the corners of Ujicha's lips twitched upward. Although he felt sorry for the deceased Bron, thanks to Bron's death, Ujicha's future was becoming even brighter. Having lost such a knight, Count Kobold was sure to be on the lookout for strong warriors. Ujicha had the confidence that he was skilled enough to fill Bron's spot. After receiving a knighthood from Count Kobold, if Ujicha was able to accumulate enough merits, he might even be able to get his name listed within the group of the 12 finest that Bron had been a member of. If that happens, then I'll be sure to live a luxurious life as an aristocrat. Ujicha thought to himself with a smile as he turned to look at his surroundings. He looked around the primitive and dirty market. Foreign slaves, naked and in chains, were displayed like pieces of meat hung up at a butcher's stall. "Please save me." There were all sorts of similar calls. Every foreign slave was shouting who they were and what country they were from, hoping for rescue. The tribal criminals who had been punished with slavery were just looking around with fearful eyes, even as they inflated themselves to try and look as muscular as possible. Seeing this, Ujicha made up his mind. Right now he had arrived at this market as this pig's escort, but someday he would return here again after having become a noble of Shimuan. In front of these big guys from the greater tribes, whom as the chief warrior of the Garung tribe he wasn't even qualified to look in the eye as they swaggered about, he would return as a noble that they would all struggle to line up to greet. While picturing that distant, no, not so distant future, Ujicha's lips quivered into a smile. "Ujicha." At that moment Dajarang shouted, grabbed Ujicha by the arm and started shaking him. "Fat elf. Over there." "What elf?" Ujicha asked. Up to this point they had been taking a look around the market, but they had only managed to find one elf for sale. The problem was that the elf was a man and Dajarang didn't show any interest in him because all his limbs were intact. However, now Dajarang's voice was filled with more desire than ever before. "Right in front of us." Ujicha looked up ahead to where Dajarang was pointing. "But she has all her limbs." Ujicha pointed out hesitantly. "Don't you see she's missing an eye?" Dajarang shouted, practically gulping back his drool. Indeed, now that Ujicha took a second look, the elf in front of them had lost her right eye, leaving behind a mass of scars. Dajarang muttered excitedly, "She doesn't even have an eye patch. Are those scars from a knife? Or could they be burn scars instead?" The scarring left on blatant display had aroused Dajarang's interest. While Ujicha definitely couldn't understand such a twisted taste, for the sake of his glorious and sweet future, he had to satisfy Dajarang's desires. Ujicha gave a confident nod of his head and quickly strode forward. "Oi, you there," he shouted. The merchants dragging this elf with them were a man and a woman. Dajarang's eyes fluttered as he glared at the man holding the elf's chain. The male merchant's physique was quite good, but it couldn't compare to that of Ujicha's, who had been training in the forest for decades. Could he be a mercenary turned slaver? That means his skills shouldn't be that great. Ujicha evaluated the skills of this slaver with the sharp eyes of Garung's chief warrior. The one beside him, could she be his wife? Seeing how their faces were similarly worn down, they seemed like a married couple. Her body doesn't appear to have been trained all that much. Could she be a wizard? Or just a bed warmer? The answer didn't really matter. While blatantly showing off his imposing biceps, Ujicha blocked the path of the two with his arms folded and demanded, "That elf. Sell her to me." Chapter 102, The Market 2. The slave market would be open for 2 days and elves would only be exhibited on the first day. On the second day, the focus would be on monsters that had already been tamed by the natives or young trainable monsters. Because they were a rare race that fetched a high price, there was a separate area where the elves could be bought and sold. Eugene had no shortage of funds. Even at their lowest prices he could get at least 1 billion sows from selling the jewels that he had managed to rip off from the Emir of Khajitan. And apart from that, before entering the forest he had sold a portion of the jewels for about 500 million sows. According to Lavera, the basic price of the elves that were sold during this market was about 300 million sows. Though the price varied depending on gender, appearance and physical condition, most elves could still be purchased by going up to 500 million sows. Usually there were at most 2 elves exhibited each time this market was held. This meant that with the money that Eugene had on him he should be able to snap up all the elves. "It's even cheaper than I thought," was Eugene's first thought upon hearing the price of an elf from Lavera. But in hindsight it wasn't really all that good a deal. The elves who returned to Samar usually had a few flaws. In the case of Nerissa, one of her legs had been amputated, while Lavera had lost an eye. If an elf were able to escape slavery and travel to this distant forest, they were bound to have gone through many hardships along the way, and in the process it was also likely for them to have received irrecoverable wounds. These wounds weren't necessarily physical wounds either. Even elves were helpless in the face of mental illnesses. PTSD in particular was one of the chronic diseases most common among elves who had experienced slavery. To sum up, their limbs weren't always intact, their virginity wasn't guaranteed, they weren't necessarily young, and even their minds might not be sound. Not only that, the chance of them being afflicted with the demonic disease was not zero, so it was actually surprising that elves still went for at least 300 million sals. That's about the same price as a pair of giant's testicles, Eugene recalled. Gargeth, that son of a bitch. Eugene ground his teeth as he recalled that distant relative of his that he had last seen several years ago. Thanks to that jacked-up muscular pig, his sense of economic scale had become strange. I wonder if he's still chasing after strange supplements like this? Eugene thought idly. In fact, Eugene had received several letters from Gargeth while he was in Arath. Gargeth had made sure to send letters of congratulations on each of Eugene's birthdays, along with a gift of things like supplements that were supposed to be good for the body. Of course, Eugene hadn't eaten any of them. All of the supplements that Gargeth had sent were full of questionable ingredients. These supplements were instead repackaged into gifts for Lovelian and Melkith, who were secretly worried about looking their own age, so thanks to Gargeth, Eugene had even become pretty well liked by Melkith. Sir Ryan, Christina called out his alias. I know, Eugene said as he stopped his idle reminiscing and looked up ahead. From a short distance away, a giant bald-headed man was swaggering over towards them. Eugene looked at the tattoos inked here and there on his bulging muscles, then checked the tribal markings hanging from his waist. The Garung tribe. Eugene wasn't flustered. This market was a huge event that always drew a large number of the tribes in the area to participate. It was because of this that he hadn't brought Nerissa, as he was afraid that her being recognized might cause a commotion. As for the risk that someone recognized his face despite his disguise, that was nothing to worry about. Eugene had annihilated every single one of the warriors of the Garung tribe who had attacked him in their first encounter, where he hadn't had his hood up. Oi, you there, the bald warrior called out to them, his gaze looking down on them. Eugene himself was on the tall side, but the warrior surpassed him by a head. That elf. Sell her to me, the warrior demanded. Eugene had been wondering what this guy was going to say. Looking behind the bald warrior, Eugene spotted the pig-like noble that was snickering to himself. His skin that seemed like it hadn't seen much sunlight, a belly fat enough that it was poking out of the fabric of his shirt, and hands that had never suffered from a day of work in his life. That emblem on his chest. I don't know which clan it belongs to. His clothing isn't in the Kiel style either. He must be from Shimuin. The Sea Kingdom. Shimuin was an island country found in the Southern Sea. Eugene responded to the demand. My apologies, but this elf cannot be sold. Ujicha's face contorted into a scowl at this reply. He glared down at Eugene with a gaze filled with killing intent, but Eugene just shrugged gently with a troubled expression on his face. You can't sell her? Why not? Ujicha barked out. Eugene hesitated. There's a reason why I can't sell her to you. What's the reason? Ujicha growled. Even though she had lost an eye, Lavera was nonetheless beautiful. So Eugene had been expecting that someone might make an offer for her, and he had already thought of a reason for which he could turn them down. This elf has been cursed, Eugene stated. A curse? Are you saying that she's caught the elf-killing disease? Ujicha asked. Indeed, it seems that you're already aware of it. Yes, this elf has caught the disease. She can somehow survive by staying in this forest, but if she leaves the forest she will die within a few days, Eugene explained. Ujicha's brow furrowed at these words. Instead of pressing Eugene any further, Ujicha turned his head to look back at Dajarang. So what if she's caught the disease? Why should that matter? As if he had been waiting for this opportunity, Dajarang stepped forward with a smile. In fact, it's even better that she's caught the disease. Doesn't that just make her price cheaper? Oi, that elf, I'll buy her for 100 million sals. Eugene just let out a snort at Dajarang's shout and shook his head. There is no way that I can do that. Even if she's caught the disease, an elf is still an elf. So how can I sell her for the low price of 100 million sals? Then I'll give you 300. 300 million sals. That much should be enough, right? Dajarang couldn't contain his excitement, his fat ass shaking from side to side. All the while he had been scanning Lavera from head to toe with greedy eyes. Eugene hesitated. You're offering 300 million? But you don't seem like someone who lives in this forest, sire. Why does that matter? Dajarang demanded. I can just play around with her while I'm staying in this forest. Seemed that this guy was crazy. Was he really saying that he would pay 300 million sals just to play around with her for a few days? 300 million sals was a huge amount of money, Enough to buy a pair of the giant's testicles that Garjeth so enjoyed. Eugene composed himself. Sire, pardon me, but may I ask how old you are? I'm 23 years old. Although he didn't know the reason why Eugene was asking this question, Dojarang puffed up his chest as he replied. Eugene let out a deep sigh at these words and shook his head from side to side. 23 years old? It looks like he's just a brat who's never once had to earn money with his own abilities and was just lucky enough to be born into a noble clan. Is he really trying to waste the money that his father worked so hard to earn just for a few days of fun? Eugene saw a reflection of Yuet in Dojarang. The unfilial bastard who had been sent abroad to Arath in order to study magic, only to play around with succubi and almost get initiated into black magic. Sire, I am truly very sorry, but I refuse to sell this elf to your grace. Eugene firmly rejected the offer. What? Dojarang burst out. Although it might be hard for you to believe this, despite all appearances, I am proud of my profession and the way I do business, Eugene said sincerely. If my insight is correct, then your grace should be the heir of a high-ranking Shimuan nobleman, and my pride as a merchant would never tolerate selling a sick elf like this to such a personage. Pride? What kind of bullshit excuse was that? What kind of pride could a merchant who sold such flawed elves even have? You lowly merchant, just what in the world do you think you're saying? Could it be that you are afraid that I might pester you later for a refund on the grounds that the elf is diseased? Dojarang glared at Eugene with wide eyes. I am Dojarang Kobyl. My father is Shimuan's Count Kobyl. I swear on the name and honor of my clan that I won't try to persecute you in any way after our deal has been struck. To think that he would actually place the name and honor of his clan on the line just to buy an elf that he intended to use as a perishable plaything. This spoiled bastard is even worse than Yuet, Eugene realized. Hiding his disdain, Eugene denied him again. It's not like I don't believe you, sire. It's that my pride as a merchant won't allow me to do it. I refuse to sell this elf to anyone, not just to you, sire. You son of a bitch. I'm saying that I'm fine with it and I've even got the money to pay for it. So why are you putting up such a fuss and refusing to sell to me? Fine, 500 million, I'm offering you 500 million sals. Still not enough? Then 800 million. Dojarang spat out these words with a spray of saliva, but he still kept his voice from rising too high. While it was true that Count Kobyl was a high-ranking nobleman of the Shimuan kingdom, apart from the Garung tribe he hadn't been able to establish a connection to any of the other greater tribes. It was too late to throw out a new line now, as the Xyle tribe was already busy managing the current market. If a fight were to break out in the market, the Xyle tribe was sure to intervene and Dojarang couldn't risk getting in trouble with them. Sire, what you're asking me to sell isn't an elf, it's my pride. Even if you offered me 8 billion sals instead of 800 million sals, I will never sell my pride, Eugene said with a wide-eyed look of sincerity. Dojarang was left speechless, pounding his chest in frustration, but Ujicha was looking at Eugene with admiration. What pride? Although it was only the pride of a merchant, those pride-filled words had heavily resonated with what little was left of the warrior's spirit within Ujicha. Then if you're not going to sell her to me, why not just give her to me? Dojarang pleaded petulantly. Please don't say something so ridiculous, Eugene scoffed. I'm not going to sell this elf, I'm going to take her out into the forest and kill her myself. Dojarang's jaw dropped. Why would someone who calls himself a businessman eat such a loss? It's not a loss if it's for the sake of keeping my pride. Well then, I think we're done here. Without saying any more, Eugene stepped past Dojarang. Dojarang reached out to try and grab hold of Eugene, but Ujicha managed to grab Dojarang's wrist first. Why, you son of a bitch, Dojarang cursed. Why are you stopping me? No, before that, why did you just stay silent instead of helping me? If I had come forward to threaten him, the Xyle tribe wouldn't have stayed still, Ujicha said in his defense. So what? I need that elf, Dojarang said, panting in rage. Don't worry about it, Ujicha lowered his body and whispered into Dojarang's ear. In any case, he said that he wouldn't be selling the elf. When he leaves the market and exits the Xyle tribe's territory, we can attack him at that moment, kill him and take the elf for ourselves. Will that really be okay? Dojarang asked doubtingly. Ujicha reassured him. It will be fine. Usually such an action wouldn't be allowed. This market had been opened following an agreement made between the various tribes. The agreement also specified that the merchants provided with plaques to attend the market were not to be attacked. But Ujicha didn't care about that. Although the pride-filled words that the merchant had uttered had resonated with his warrior's soul, Ujicha would still much rather be a nobleman than a warrior. Your nonsense sounded very persuasive, Christina said once they were alone. If you thought that it sounded persuasive, there must be something wrong with your head, Eugene snorted. In the first place, I did call it nonsense, didn't I? Christina defended herself. Thanks to Sir Ryan, it seems that I've learned a rather useless life lesson. Life lesson? Eugene repeated. Yes. The outcome of an argument is often decided by how loud your voice is, rather than logic, Christina said with a sigh. And rather than persuasion, you should just back them into a corner and give them no room to respond. Tina, you really are a genius. Eugene gaped at Christina with a look of admiration. Christina just tilted her head questioningly at his sudden exclamation. Huh. The life lesson you spouted just now is something I actually learnt entirely from you. But why have you only realized it just now? Could it be that you taught it to me without even realizing that you were doing so? Eugene praised her sarcastically. Please just shut up, Christina hissed as she rolled her eyes and glared at Eugene. The following transactions all went smoothly in their own way. Eugene bought 2 male elves, and one of them had even been afflicted with the demonic disease, so he was able to purchase the elf for less than the market price. If there was one thing that could be called a minor issue, it would be that the last elf exhibited for sale was a female. She hadn't caught the demonic disease and she didn't have any scars, so the merchant who was selling her had been able to drive up her price until it was much higher than market price. 1 billion sals, Eugene raised the bid even as he felt like he was about to cough out blood. The spectators that had flocked to this impromptu auction let out cheerful roars. In order to pay 1 billion sals, Eugene would need to dig into the last of his remaining gems. It might be stating the obvious, but the Lionheart clan's black card couldn't be used in a market like this. Don't raise the bid anymore, Eugene begged inwardly. Wait, no, please do raise it. That way I can just give up cleanly. Feeling distressed at the potential loss of so much money, Eugene clenched his fists tightly. He didn't want to make a fuss, so if he needed to, he would reluctantly pay for the elf with his remaining jewels. However, now that he didn't have any money left, wasn't the only option to give up if someone had a higher bid? So Eugene still held out hope that someone would post a higher bid so he could be free to give up. Of course, that didn't mean he would just give up on saving that elf. He would just be left with no choice, really no choice at all, but to don a mask and become a robber. 1 billion sals. Someone has offered 1 billion sals. The auctioneer called out. Please, someone, anyone, please place a bid. After a final countdown, the auctioneer announced, sold for 1 billion sals. Congratulations. What's there to congratulate, you son of a bitch? Eugene cursed quietly. Huh. The auctioneer leaned closer. No, thanks for this, Eugene said as he swallowed the anger that was welling up inside of him and took out his box of jewels. With this purchase, Eugene had managed to squander all the jewels that he had brought into the forest with him. The slave trader who had managed to sell his elf at twice the market price had a truly gleeful look on his face. With his molars on full display, too, he calculated the total amount as he assessed each gem individually. All done, you're free to take her with you. Once he confirmed that the jewels had the appropriate value, the merchant happily handed over the elf. Eugene silently accepted his new purchase. I'm happy to have reached such a good deal with you. But you really are quite unusual, brother. What are you planning on doing with 4 elves? The slave trader asked. Eugene's mouth snapped open to let out an angry reply, only for him to get a hold of his boiling emotions and turn away from the man. All 4 elves, including Lavera, were riding in the cart that they had brought with them from the elven village. Christina hesitantly asked, Sir Ryan, are you feeling fine? No, I'm not, Eugene ground out. Your money was used to save those in need. Don't think of it as a waste, Christina advised. Who said that I was? Eugene huffed. I just said that I wasn't feeling fine. Do I look like someone who's going to act upset just because I had to spend 1.5 billion? Aren't you feeling pretty upset right now? This is just how I usually look. Although he had never had to worry about money ever since he had been reincarnated, Eugene still couldn't help but feel that it was wasteful to have spent so much money. It's all right, it might have been 1.5 billion sals, but that's only enough to buy 5 pairs of giant's testicles, Eugene tried to comfort himself, but this didn't help him very much. While Eugene was riding the horse that was pulling the cart, the elves who were riding behind him were all listening to Lavera's tale. The elves had all thought that they would definitely be branded as slaves and sold to other masters, but Lavera's words brought hope to these newly purchased elves. As they traveled, Eugene's scowling face also began to loosen up little by little. "Sir Ryan," Christina spoke up. "I know," Eugene said with a grin as he pulled on the horse's reins. As the horse accelerated, the cart started rattling. None of the elves made any noise to show surprise. Until moments ago, the faces of these elves had been filled with hope, but now all that was seen spreading across the elves' faces was fear. Lavera tried to stay calm. There was no need for her to worry. The guardian of their village, Signard, had spoken to her personally before they left. They were going to a dangerous place, but there shouldn't be any danger. No, well, they might run into something dangerous, but it wouldn't pose much of a problem. Signard had said these words while trying to reassure Lavera. But was that really the case? Lavera's shoulders began to shake at the sounds she was hearing. She could hear the pounding footsteps of a tribal warrior drawing closer. Why were they being chased? The natives of the forest should be bound by the rule of not attacking the merchants who were invited to the market. "Sir Ryan?" Lavera sought out some reassurance. Tension and fear was causing her breaths to quicken. Lavera placed a hand on her chest to calm her pounding heart as she turned to look at Eugene for reassurance. Hearing a call come from behind him, Eugene turned his head around to look back at her and asked, "What's with your expression? Are we going to be all right?" Lavera stammered. "Of course we're going to be all right. This actually works out great for us," Eugene replied with a bright smile. While their pursuers had been quickly narrowing the gap between them, past a certain point, they had stopped drawing any closer and were keeping their distance. Were they waiting until Eugene and his party had reached a point where an attack wouldn't cause any political problems for the raiders? "I guess I should be grateful," Eugene thought to himself as he continued heading straight forward, not seeing any need to change direction. Like this, they soon left the territory of the Xyle tribe. As the cart slowly headed deeper into the forest, Eugene was left wondering when their attackers would approach. Was it now? Yep, it was now. Their pursuers sped up and quickly closed the distance. Then they overtook the cart. The warrior who had been chasing after Eugene's group appeared to have been jumping through the tree branches above the road, as he fell from the air a good distance in front of them, blocking the path of the cart. Without panicking, Eugene brought the cart to a halt. Dodgerang, who had been hanging on to Ujicha's back, covered his mouth as he held in the urge to vomit. He quickly got down from Ujicha's back, collapsed onto the ground and vomited. "Get down." Even as the sounds of vomiting continued to ring out from behind him, Ujicha did not look back at Dodgerang and instead pointed his finger at Eugene as he made this demand. As he did, he also checked to see that Christina and the elves were still riding in the cart. He wasn't interested in Christina herself, since she had yet to remove her disguise of a middle-aged lady. However, after he handed the one-eyed elf over to Dodgerang, that left 3 elves for him. Ujicha licked his lips with a smile. Eugene stood up without getting down from the driver's seat. 3. You said that your name was Dodgerang Kobold, right? Like Ujicha, Eugene stretched out a finger and pointed at Dodgerang. Yorg. Dodgerang was unable to reply to the question and just kept vomiting. But the truth was that his reply didn't matter. Eugene had spent 1.5 billion sals in order to buy these 3 elves. Dodgerang had said that he would buy Lavera for 800 million. In other words, Dodgerang had at least 800 million sals worth of gems on him. It can't be helped. Eugene suppressed the urge to laugh as he leapt down from the cart. I had no intention of robbing him. But since this bastard decided to try and engage in robbery first by blocking my way, then... That just left Eugene with no other choice. Don't you understand what kind of situation you're in? Ujicha's lips twisted into a scowl as he looked at Eugene, who showed no signs of fear. Ujicha hadn't brought any of the other warriors from his tribe with them, but there shouldn't be any problems. It was just a single lowly slave trader after all. Tearing someone like him to pieces would be even easier for Ujicha than catching and killing an insect. What? Ujicha unconsciously spat out a surprised cry. The slave trader who had been right in front of them until just now had suddenly disappeared.